I think let us start the session. We are already late, and I crave the intelligence of the next three speakers. It will be very unfair to ask them to cut short their speech, which they prepared very well, you know. So if you can finish in 20 minutes each, wonderful.
You ask us to stop.
Sorry, because they had to rearrange the seat also, you know, there is some extra time needed for the public lecture. So 20 minutes will be fantastic.
It's a pleasure to be here and facing a very diverse audience, but all of them interested in science and how to communicate science. I'll make some submissions to begin with from the paper which is in your in the disc which has been given to you, but as none of you has seen it, I think I'll like to first read out from that. Science and technology are key drivers of prosperity. Today we live in societies that have been shaped dramatically by big developments in science and technology in the 20th century. Just imagine life in 1900, even for the richest. Today, a middle-class person from a developing country will have more energy capture, more choices, and more material aspirations. So I'm going to address this question of prosperity and how prosperity can come through agriculture. A simplistic representation of progression will be science leading to technology, leading to prosperity. However, we know that technologies have been developed without extensive scientific base. Plants were domesticated as crops without knowing the laws of inheritance. Wheel was discovered without theoretical calculations on friction on a wheel versus on a cube. And dwarf types of wheat and rice were developed without the knowledge of genomic architecture of plants. So technology is more fundamental. This is the second point I want to make. However, it needs to be admitted that most of the new age technologies require a scientific base. Biotechnology is one such area. Basic explorations in molecular structure of life in the late 50s and 60s led to unearthing of many phenomena that contributed to the development of recombinant DNA technologies in the 60s and 70s. All this happened. Basic discoveries in molecular biology and their translation into technologies happened in almost a span of 20 years, an explosive period of molecular biology developments and their use in technology development. Given the potential of technologies based on recombinant DNA and on molecular biology, many scientists, and there are many people in science also who are very cautious by nature, met at the Asilomar Conference Center in 1975 in California to discuss how to use recombinant DNA properly, how to use these technologies properly. So misgivings, apprehensions, fears about the power of recombinant DNA technology and transfer of genes from one organism to the other is not very new. It is there right from the very genesis of these technologies. But the fact remains that science and technology are more and more becoming two sides of the same coin. I mentioned technology has its own life, and a lot of technologies were developed without scientific base. But more and more modern technologies, whether they are in materials, or they are in nuclear, or they are in biotechnology, are very science-based. Therefore, science and technology are now feeding into each other in a very big way, and that makes the story a little bit even more complicated. The path from technology to prosperity is also not linear. It requires mobilization of finance, organizational capacity, and an overarching political legal system that encourages investment, entrepreneurship, and trade. A commoner on the street might have read some science. Many remember names of Newton and Darwin, may use all kinds of products of modern technology, but are more influenced by the prevalent socio-political structures than by the scientific knowledge or brilliance that has gone into explaining the material basis of life. This still remains a hard reality, that we are very influenced by the socio-political structures around us. In the connectivity between science, technology, prosperity, the last players hog the limelight. Science is in the textbook. It is some facts that we must know. Reading science may not necessarily lead to the development of a scientific temper. For some, technology developments are too mundane. Those who design a circuit or a chip or some kind of nuts, boring nuts, The modern age heroes are those who generate wealth. In fact, products are associated with companies and CEOs rather than with the scientists and the people who have made those products. Yet, we all know that science and technology remain foundational. And this is a big reality. Any country which wants to prosper and go up in the prosperity ladder cannot ignore science and technology. It is not ignorance that holds S&T hostage. The threat is more from ideological positions that touch the heart of societies more than the cold rationality of science. S&T can become subservient to ideology and politics in any society. Thus, S&T has taken and will take in future also different form and routes of development in a fascist, communist, feudal, theocratic, or a democratic structure. Fortunately, Indian Republic, and I sincerely believe that, thanks to its founding fathers and a civil independence struggle, is committed to an open society. I hope we will remain committed to it. And S&T has flourished more in open societies, committed to principles of democracy and competitive market systems, although there are many variations on this generality also. So how has S&T thrived in many parts of the world, even though its practices and development are obscure to a commoner on the street? It remains a fact that human beings can be extraordinarily creative. This creativity is captured by all progressive societies through concentrating creative people in institutions like universities and more in companies where knowledge generation and its use is promoted and protected by intellectual property right. It is the elite, particularly that supported by public funding, when it compromises with ideologues or political power, that disaster strikes. And I want to raise this issue in terms of what the scientists have done in the recent 2 or 3 years in terms of their attack on GM crops. Crop biotechnology, GM technologies, transgenic, I believe, should be the preferred term because genetically modified crops have been modified since domestication for last 10,000 years. The crops that we consume today don't look at all similar to what happened at the beginning of the sedentary mode of life and domestication of crops. The next point I want to make is that transgenic technologies are now more than 20-year-old. Many refinements have been made. Earlier, transgenics were developed with genes from bacterial genomes. With the advent of genomic era and new breakthroughs in instrumentation, more complex genomes are being analyzed now. Almost 70 plant species genome has been already sequenced. And the question is, if you are not going to use genetic engineering technologies, then what for this knowledge is being generated? We might as well close the shop and say this is worthless science. So it is for the country to decide whether we want to use GM technologies or not. It is difficult to expect this to be decided by a referendum. It has to be decided by the political leadership, which has to be assured by the scientific community about the potential of the technology and its safety. The job of the scientific elite is to guide the political leadership properly in matters related to science and technology. And this is the last point I want to make from my written one, and then I'll go to the slides. Indian scientific elite, those who can influence political class in power, is in general quasi-feudal, a reflection of our societal structure, comfortable with mediocrity, and averse to risk-taking. Epistemical brokers are more important than the developers of technology. This is why most of our attempts at establishing a science-technology prosperity linkage have not been very successful. Who is opposing the use of transgenic technologies? Consumers, because everybody wants wholesome natural food. Anti-science NGOs and the neo-left for whom prosperity is not critical. Classical left because transnationals are involved in biotechnology and alleviation of rural poverty will forever kill the possibility of a utopian society. Extreme right, as everything glorious happened in the past and the future lies in the past. And finally, the scientists who doubt the practice of science and technology under the Indian context. So let me say this, that in spite of all these difficulties, we have to make a case for GM technologies. And I'll try to make that case in as short a possible time as is possible. In 1900, the global population was around 1.6 billion, 1.7 billion. By the end of last century, it was about 6 billion, and today it is about 7.2 billion. And in 2023, we are going to outstrip China in our population size. We had a health revolution, which has led to people living much longer, and child mortality coming down in many parts of the world. How did we beat these Malthusian predictions that there will be famines? And there have been cases of famines. By fertilizers, mechanization, plant breeding, and of course, everything requires proper management. I want to say this to very receptive and very sensitive people sitting here, that a single technology is not solution to all the problems in agriculture. It should be very clear that genetic modification of crop plants is only one of the weapons in our arsenal to increase crop productivity and crop stability. We need all these things. And without all these things, simply some genetically engineered plants are not going to help. For example, crop rotation. That's a very simple practice which is not going on in India. So there are many managerial practice. Water usage. As I go along, I'll show you some data on that. Out of 200,000 years of human evolution, only 10,000 years are in sedentary mode of life based on agriculture and domestication of crops and plants, which started in the Fertile Crescent, where some of the crops were domesticated. The rest of the world saw domestication much later. Today we live in a globalized world, so all kind of crops are available to us, which were never available about 2,000 to 3,000 years back. And this is what happened. We talk about genetic modification. Corn cob from 7,000 years back, corn cobs from 500 years archaeological digging in Mexico. You see, human beings have been constantly selecting for more productive crops. And then the revolution started with the modern revolution of plant breeding around 1935, when in the US, people started growing hybrid corn. And by 1960s, 95% of the area in the United States was under hybrid corn, and it's spreading all over the world. Most of the corn which is being grown is hybrid corn. So this is how we have fed the world, through technology. Dwarf rice, we got it for free. And this has been a major feeding base for South Asia and Asian countries who would have faced famine if we would not have had these dwarf varieties. And this is how much breeding effort went into IR varieties. Is anybody reporting on this? We have forgotten a bit. The only person who has written about Green Revolution recently is Shankaracharya in his book Accidental India, where his main thesis is that we only respond when we are facing a crisis. Otherwise, we just go along merrily. Is this story known? How much effort went into classical breeding to create these dwarf varieties? Norman Borlaug with his dwarf wheat. It was a revolution. And I must say, I was living on the rural side of Punjab when the Green Revolution came. What it did to the countryside, it brought roads, it brought prosperity, it brought electricity, it brought so many things along with it. So those who decry Green Revolution, and there are people who are decrying it, they must, I don't know what is their logic and what they are saying. Organic cultivation is a big thing which we all get enticed by. There are two major reports on meta-analysis on trials under organic condition. And this is something taken from the world's most important science magazine, Nature, where it has been shown that at least 40% of more area will be required if you grow wheat organically. 40% more area will be required to get the same output as we are getting in the world today. This does not discount the use of organic manure. This does not rule out that you should not bring more benign practices into agriculture. This just states the fact that it will not be possible to feed the world by just organic cultivation. I wanted to show you some comparisons, and I think these comparisons we should learn something from these comparisons. India has about 150 million hectares under agriculture. China has about 110. Germany 12. I brought Germany because it's a very green country as the world perceives it, and from a lot of green movements start from here. Cereals, China is producing almost double than India. Vegetables, 5 times more than India. Fruits, 1.5 times to 1.75 more than us. Now look at in India, there is comparison with Germany, a very advanced country. We use 20,000 tons of insecticide because we are a tropical country. Fortunately, in the temperate regions, the insect pressure is much less. But they use about 10,000 tons of fungicides only on 12 million hectares of land. We are using more than them on 150 million hectares. Herbicides, their herbicide use is much more than ours on the total land which is under cultivation in India right now. Just to give you this idea that there is a lot of misconceptions and misinformation going on agriculture. India has the largest withdrawals of groundwater. Number 2 is China. There are other countries also where withdrawals are too much, but India is a case where water withdrawals are very high. And we will have to do something about this if we want to maintain our food security. A comparison with China will not be out of the place here. This is total withdrawals in 2010 for India. This is total withdrawals for China. And we are using 90% of our withdrawals for irrigation and livestock. Very dangerous situation. We have very little water left for improving human life, living conditions. We have very little water left for industry. Only 2% is being used for industry. China is using 23% of its withdrawal for industry. So if the industrial revolution is going to come to India, you will require much more water for feeding into industry. And of course for improving living standards, where a lot of people are defecating in the open still. Let there be no ambiguity that world seed trade is controlled by very few companies. Monsanto, DuPont, Syngenta, and the French company will almost be dealing with about 50% of seed trade. This is a fact which needs to be brought to the attention of colleagues. And if you don't want seed-based technologies, you have agrochemicals to make. In fact, you will need both. In agrochemicals, 89% of the global production is in the hand of 10 companies, and this is an old data. I think in 2014, the situation might have even changed more in favor of these companies. And these are all European companies, except Dow, which is an American company. So there is a huge amount of agrochemicals being used and will continue to be used. The only replacement is biotechnology, and if you don't want biotechnology, you have to go more for agrochemicals. This is also a fact that intellectual property generated in the public system in Western countries today is patented and goes to the transnational. It's a fact of life. And companies like Monsanto have gobbled up many small seed companies to become big multinationals which have a reach all over the world. I want to also bring to your attention that it is not that we have refused to look at agriculture. We have the largest number of standalone agricultural institutions in the world. In the US, the land-grant universities are all subjects. We love to create small institutions because we believe that in smaller institutions we can focus better. In the larger universities, we will get lost. I don't want to get too much into it because the time doesn't permit it. But we have 99 institutes. We have 68 agriculture universities. Now, if you don't want to involve yourself with new technologies, if you don't want to do precision breeding through marker-assisted breeding and things like that, you disrespect science of genomics and how to use it, then what for these people are created? Is it a method of social security, or is it to advance the country and its agriculture? So here we are. This is the new revolution. We have been breeding through conventional breeding using species, genera. I gave you example of dwarf wheat, dwarf rice, but we have now new opportunities through transgenic crops. And how we are going to use it is the question. 160 to 170 million hectares are already under transgenic crops. And BT cotton, you can say anything. The success of a crop or a technology is try withdrawing it and see what reaction you get. Nobody is suggesting withdraw BT cotton. I asked my NGO friends and others, why are you not saying that? If it's an evil and if all these technologies are going to destroy us, then why are you not asking withdrawal of it and coming up with the alternatives? But they say, no, 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 this has been all captured now, and these kind of arguments. I want to give you an example from my own work. In 2002, I mentioned to Shiv that he wrote a very perceptive article in EPA where he said that this biotechnology debate is sort of like a soap opera which goes on. This was in 2002. And I'm a little distressed to report to the August gathering here that this soap opera is going on without any sign of resolution still. We produced in mustard a hybrid, which all ICAR trials, independent from us, has shown yields 20 to 30% more than the best varieties of mustard that are in the field. This was developed in 2002, and this is 2014. 12 years, and we have no liking, respect for this technology. So my question is, why should we ask India's younger generation of scientists who are joining different institutes, ICERs, new central universities, why should you work on transgenic research if you are not going to use a technology which is already in field in Canada for last 20 years? The meal is being exported to all over the world, including Japan, which otherwise doesn't allow transgenic crops to grow within their territory. But they're consuming it. They're consuming huge amounts of soy meal, huge amount of rapeseed meal, which are all transgenic. So I will not dwell more on it. I just wanted to show you some data, and I wanted to show you a trial which was burnt in Rajasthan because the government developed cold feet. It was all done under the supervision of ICAR scientists on the campus of an agriculture university. Now, you don't like it, that means you are saying no to this technology. And I think the time has come when we should ask the government of today, what is their policy, yes or no? Because if it is no, then you will have to develop alternative technologies to increase the yield. Every crop, I will take 5 more minutes if you allow me. Every crop we know what are the problems with those crops. Just like human beings have problems, every crop has problem with its health. There are a number of breeding objectives which need to be met for each crop, and these diseases will not run away. They will not go away. It's like malaria or things like antibiotic resistance. I want to bring that in also. There is no permanent solution also. You will have to continuously run. And this is the way we have fed the world from 1900 onwards after the advent of classical new breeding based on Mendelian laws of inheritance and now through GM crops. We will have to constantly run. There is no permanent solution. Maybe the great science of genomics which we are doing today with millions of dollars being spent will give us more permanent solutions. But with pest, pathogen, and plant interaction, there is no permanent solution. And I just wanted to show you that we know for each crop. What we don't know, how to get there. We are not mounting good enough science to resolve these problems and to increase India's crop productivity. So what are the issues? There is lack of knowledge about the technology And I think there we need to reach out to people and to inform them about what this technology is about. And I don't know how science communicators are going to do it, but I think we should try. We have non-governmental organizations, less said the better. Some of them have done very sterling things. Some of them are just hysteric. We have ideological leanings, and we have a very strange thing which I call grandstanding, where I say something and the person next door to me must oppose it just to make his or her presence felt. This has happened at the political level. This happens between parties. This happens in the scientific domain between scientists pursuing different areas of research and development. So this grandstanding and apathy. You know, there was a great example of where science went wrong in Soviet Union when Lysenko made a poisonous brew of communism with anti-plant breeding ideas. But at least he gave an alternative. He said you can teach plants to grow under stressed conditions by slowly bringing them into stressed conditions. He tried to be scientific. We have people who are opposing and bringing no alternatives on the table. And that is what I call as apathy. I wanted to talk a little bit more about these three books because my reporter friends are there. This lady, I have talked to her in many meetings and so on. What she says is that the Green Revolution destroyed Punjab. Insurgency, everything was due to, every ill that happened in Punjab was due to Green Revolution. And the picture on the top of the book is somewhere from China because we don't have this kind of rice growing in India and we don't have these kind of grain fillers in anywhere on the landscape of Punjab. So even the cover is not original. Just hysteria is original in how much you can create hysteria around it. This book is a little bit more scientific. There is a fact that 1.2 billion people in the world are overfed. They are consuming about 850 kg of food every year. And about same number is only 150 kg. Very poor, just living on starvation diets. So will they redistribute? Will Americans turn vegetarian? And what will happen to our farmers if the yields don't increase in the field? And of course, a very good reportage, very sensitive reportage is this book, Everybody Loves a Good Drought, which is more an indictment of bureaucracy which handles the great social schemes rather than the actual criticism of science and technology. And finally, I'll come to my friends on a committee which was appointed by Supreme Court. If you want to see an anti-science document, please read this. No solution, clearly said, for socio-economic reasons, GM technologies should not be brought in. When they were asked to comment on the safety parameters, when they were asked to comment on how they can be improved, nothing positive, only the bidding of the NGOs who, out of hysteric reaction, God knows what inspires them. I have not been able to figure it out. Finally, I'll come to my last slide. Convince consumers that plant breeding is an important activity and that biotech is here to stay. You can refuse it, other countries are not going to refuse it. China has put billions of dollars into genomic research and into more refined plant breeding through genetic engineering. And if we want to turn our face away from this, then I think we should know now and start developing the alternatives, which is basically going to be agrochemicals. Convince farmers that low input, high output agriculture requires technology. This is the key thing, the key message which I want to leave. Everything should go around low input, high output agriculture. Low water usage, but higher output. These are not, please, if I can just make you believe for a moment, I think India can have almost 8% growth in agriculture. But we need to have the right policies and the backing up of those policies. And we cannot achieve that 8%, 7%, 8% growth rate without being friendly with science and technology. And finally, build and highlight some S&T success stories. This is my criticism of India's science bureaucracy. We want to do everything below threshold, keep everybody alive but not running. If I can give an example from cricket, it was like when we used to play only for a draw, till some guys came around and won the World Cup in 70s, and then we started thinking that we can win also. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. You stuck to time. The next speaker is Dr. Meenakshi Sundaram.
Friends, before I start my presentation, I have to make two confessions. The first confession is, I am neither a scientist nor a communicator. In this conference on bridging the gap between when the science meets the public, I represent the public. What I am going to tell you is from the perspective of the public. I have been a civil servant with 40 years experience, during which period I have met a large number of politicians, bureaucrats, scientists, academics in different organizations. I also have met a large number of public in all my jobs. Therefore, what I am going to tell you will be from the perspective of the public. The second confession I have to make is that though it says I am a visiting professor, I am not really a professor. My strength does not come from reading large reports or doing research and reading textbooks. My strength comes from talking to the people. I am more comfortable sitting with 20 or 30 rural poor women belonging to a self-help group in Mysore district rather than talking with intellectuals. Now, because my strength comes from that, what I am proposing to do is straight go to the field. Tell you some 2 or 3 case studies relating to land and natural resources. And all of them are known to you. At some point of time, if you are reading the newspapers, you would have read these things. I am only going to draw what conclusions one can do from these 3 case studies. That is what I propose to do, hopefully in the next 15 minutes. I have only 9 slides, at the end of which I am reasonably confident that I will be able to communicate to you what I wish to communicate. Now, there is the need for communication on land and land resources. If you go to rural India, land is central to livelihoods. In most cases, without the land, there is no livelihood. Especially when you are a small and marginal farmer, if 3 acres of land is given to you, that's a great boon. If 3 acres of land is taken away from you in the form of acquisition, it's a great tragedy. So the land grant and land acquisition, both of which I had handled as a collector of a couple of districts, it plays a crucial role in the lives of small and marginal farmers. Why is this important? People do not know where lands are available, why the lands are acquired, for what purpose they are acquired. We just do not tell them. One fine morning, the local collector issues a notification under Section 4(1) of the Land Acquisition Act and says your land is taken away for such and such purpose. Now, people do not have the information. They don't know what they should do. Lack of information leads to a lot of disputes, and the disputes create economic and social instability. Now, that is why you need to have communication not only for the farmer, but also for the benefit of the rest of the society. I am going to deal with only 3 case studies. The first one is the diversion of public lands in Karnataka for major scientific institutions. The representative of all these institutions, incidentally, are present in this hall. DRDO, BARC, Baba Atomic Research Center, ISRO, Indian Institute of Science. This is a diversion of public lands in Karnataka, in Chitradurga district, from the government to the government institutions. The land goes from the government to the government. The second is the case, acquisition of private lands for Tata Nano project, which I am sure everybody in this hall will be familiar with. That is the acquisition of private lands. The third is a combination of both. private and public lands in Orissa for mining industry. The case of POSCO as well as Vedanta. These are the cases which I am going to explain. The beauty is each one is by a different political government. The government which did the first one was a BJP government in Karnataka. The second one is the left front government in West Bengal. The third is the JD, I don't know what is that called. BJD, sorry. Biju Janata Dal, BJD of Orissa. Three different political parties, so nobody can tell me that you are particularly talking about a government. Everybody is in the same boat. That is the point which I am trying to say. Irrespective of who runs the government, the story appears to be the same. Now, I will quickly go to my first story. It is the Karnataka case with which I am terribly familiar. This is the purpose of Amrit Mahal Kaval lands. By Kaval land, we mean a grazing ground for the people. From the days, for the cattle. From the days of the Maharajas, we used to reserve some land for cattle grazing. In a place called Challakere in Chitradurga district, we have something like about 15,000 acres of land, which was earmarked for grazing by this Amrit Mahal Kaval category of cattle. Now, over the years, there has been a drought and the strength of the cattle had come down. The lands have been misused. There has been some encroachment. So one collector thought probably the best way to save these lands from encroachment is to give it to people who really want. He identified good institutions. You can't complain anything about DRDO, BARC or ISRO. These are all good institutions. So he identified the lands and he said we will propose for diversion. The case for diversion was that you have nice, good organizations coming in. That will change the whole culture of Chitradurga district. You will have people coming in with them, educational institutions, health facilities, all that will come. In any case, the land is being misused or encroached. We will give it to the scientific departments. They will look after all that. That was the idea behind diversion. What was the case against diversion? There are large number of people who are dependent on this land. Their cattle were grazing in this place. And a number of minor forest produce was coming from this land and people were taking their livelihood out of this. There is a market close by, Challakere, where you can sell your produce. So you are directly hitting the livelihood of the people. The response of the government was, if you lose that job, you will get some other job. The DRDO will employ you, or ISRO will employ you, or somebody else will employ you. You are going to have a large development in that area. I am not going into the question as to who is right or who is wrong. That's not my job here. I am not trying to say what government did is correct or what the people said is correct. But what does this show really? We have been able to do something without telling the people as to what we are doing. My crucial point is the communication gap. When there is 10 to 15,000 acres of land, it might not have been a major problem to identify some acceptable land and give it to these organizations. In fact, in the case of Department of Space, of the land proposed by them, about 30 acres of land will go for formation of a road. Even that also is borne by them. So it is better that if the people can sit together along with these organizations, they could have come to some amicable settlement. You may not give them 10,000 acres, you may give them less. You may find a way how the cattle can also graze, people can also have their livelihood. Now, what happened at the moment? The entire matter is now before the Green Tribunal. First, they went to the government. Government said, no, we are going to continue with this diversion. Then people went to they formed an association, went to the court. The net result is currently a stay is given. Whatever construction has commenced, that has stopped. And we have the matter pending before the court. That is the first case. The second case of West Bengal. I did not have to spend a lot of time. I'm sure everybody would have read this. In this case, why did the left front government propose acquisition? They felt that two things. One, they do not want to have the impression that we are industry unfriendly government. They also want to show that we are for industries. Second, instead of everybody dependent on agriculture, you need to provide some kind of an alternative. This industry will give local livelihood. So that is the reason the government said we will go for this project. How was it executed? They did not go to the people. They called the local MLA, local party bosses. You know how the left government functions. They called the local bosses. They said, will it happen? They said, don't worry, it's not a problem. We will be able to convince the people. And the land acquisition was announced following the strict government rules. But then what happened? The land is fertile. It is very close to Calcutta. People do not want to give. Political parties also wanted to make some benefit out of this. The movement became very huge. There were court cases. And finally, what happened? The Tatas decided that this is not the place to do. They went away to Gujarat. But that does not complete my story. The land has been meanwhile acquired. The land, if I am correct, is in the possession of Tatas even now. When the present government came to power, they brought in a bill saying that we will take the lands from Tatas and give it to the original owners. That was approved by the governor, became an act. The other parties took it to the court. The Calcutta High Court said this is unconstitutional. The act was thrown out. Now the state government has taken it to the Supreme Court, and if I am correct, the matter is still pending before the Supreme Court. So the second issue is, why is this happened? There has been no communication between the government and the people. In my view, if there has been a communication, one side would have had its way. I am not saying it should be this side or that side, but at least there will be some peace, and the question of its landing in the court would not have happened. The third case, there has been a national steel policy which says that we should become self-sufficient in steel. We have a large amount of material available in the country, and we should take up growth in steel industry. So the government identified people who can take up large steel plants. POSCO, which is a major steel industry in 16 countries of the world, they will be exported. It's an excellent project, and it will bring something like 500 million rupees to India every month, every year. This is what they said. All right, the government agreed. The Orissa government made a statement. It is going to change the entire face of the state. It is going to be a large-scale benefit for the people. But what happened? When they went to the spot, the local people came. They said the land belongs to the tribals, and their livelihood is on the basis of this land. We live on the minor forest produce. There is a forest land which you could not have taken. So all this became an issue. The regular debate of whether you should sacrifice environment for development, or development is more important than environment. Can you find some kind of a compromise? All these things happened. But what is the position now? Not even an inch of land could be acquired for the purpose of POSCO. There is another parallel case, Vedanta, which is for bauxite mining from the Nyamgiri hills in Orissa. There again the same problem. People went to the court. The court said, you consult the tribals and go by their opinion. All the 12 Gram Sabhas of the tribal areas said, we don't want this. Then finally, the Environment Ministry, which gave its concurrence earlier, had to withdraw that, and that project also is on standstill. What is that I am trying to say on these three stories? First, in all these cases, the agitations could have been prevented. I will not blame either the government or the people, but I will blame the mechanism. We could not sit together and discuss threadbare as to what is possible and what is not possible. Again and again I am going back, it is the lack of communication that is the villain in this case. The stakeholders' opposition stems from poor or no consultations. See, my experience in government tells me what people expect from the government is a patient hearing. If your collector spends 10 minutes in listening to your problem, the villager is more than satisfied. He does not want him to solve the problem. He at least wants him to hear his problem. Now, the difficulty in this case is nobody heard the stakeholder in any one of these three cases. There is something called the principle of prior and informed consent. The more important word is the informed consent. Are we able to give this? It has been violated in all these cases. And as I said earlier, irrespective of whichever political party runs the state government, the reaction of the state governments has always been similar. They will try to oppose. Finally, the matter has to go somewhere else and settle. The governments will not go back and accept, sorry, we did not consult. We don't mind getting back and talking to them. That kind of an approach is never there in any government. But who provided the remedy? In all these cases, if you see, it is the court. It is not the job of the court. I have seen the judgment of a court which says it is better in the interest of long-term solution, peace and harmony. The matter is settled between the stakeholders and the government. It has been very clearly said that it is not the job of the court. But in all these cases, the tragedy is the court has stayed, the court has finalized, and we went only by what the court said. What did we achieve at the end of the day? Nothing. The cost is huge, benefit is nil. Both the parties went to the court. And the only beneficiary, if at all I can say, is the lawyers who are running these cases, and nobody got the benefit. Now, who should have provided the remedy? Both the parties, the people and the government. If we can establish a mechanism through which they can sit and talk, probably these problems would not have come. In my view, timely and accurate information is the key to development. If people have, this is the reason why I want to acquire, this is the purpose of development, and people can decide whether they want to give up their land or whether they want to give up their development or whether there can be a compromise between the two. Now, in the last two slides, I just want to mention what is the way forward according to me. When Professor Ramamurthy wanted me to deliver this talk, he told me that don't tell the case studies and stop. Tell us what can be done. If you have some idea, please let us know. I have some ideas, so I thought I will mention that. The first thing is transparency is the key. We need to institutionalize mechanisms. We have to see how the system of acquiring the land or granting the land is always preceded by some kind of transparency. What is meant by that? The records should be clear. In most of this country, most parts of this country, the land revenue records are not in good shape. That is a neglected area. If you have a land in your village, if you want to go back and get the records related to the land, it's almost impossible. In several cases, as I know in Karnataka, the land is still in the name of the grandfather, and nobody has bothered to update the records. And even if there is an update, it is not with the support of the people, somebody can do it behind the back. It is possible with so much of technology to digitize the records and put them in public domain. Let people see, and if something is going wrong, they can make a noise. And the updating should be done only through the Gram Sabhas. See, I am really sorry that we have not been able to make use of the panchayats and panchayat raj institutions in our land administration. In my view, the truth will prevail in the village and not in the state headquarters. If the cases are to be fought in the district court, you may escape. But if the cases have to be held in the village, it will be very difficult for the culprit to escape. So it is better we have a system of updating through the Gram Sabhas. I have another case as an experienced district collector. A collector doesn't get adequate time to deal with the land records. We have so many other things. The VIP visit cannot wait. The disaster management cannot wait. Flood will not wait. What can wait? Land revenue record can wait. It has been there for several years. It can continue to be for some more days. No harm in that. Now, the collector over the period of time, historically the revenue collector's job was to collect the revenue. So he was called collector. And now the revenue is not coming from the land. It is coming from some other source with reference to which the collector has no role. Now, where is the need for the collector still dealing with land revenue and land records? There can be somebody else who can be approached by the people and who can help in updating the records. Second, there is some archaic office called District Information Office. I don't know whether any one of you have seen, but I can assure you in every district, there is something called a District Information Office. What is that fellow's job? He will only organize meetings for the government and give press handouts for the various press people. His job is to tell the press as to what is happening in the government. Now, His job is supposed to be district information officer. The information need not have to be one-sided. It can always be both ways. He can go to the people, he can organize, he can tell, this is the land we want to acquire for this purpose. If he could tell the people what is happening, probably they can respond. The third point, since Mr. Jairam Ramesh is here, I will leave that point to be explained by him. The Land Acquisition Act of 2014. We used to have a historical Land Acquisition Act which always believed that the government has got the first right to take away the land. And we were supposed to pay only the market price, and the market price is determined on the basis of sub-registry records, and people give always the lower value to escape the taxation on that. So with the result, we never had proper payment of land value compensation to the people. This Land Acquisition Act 2014 had made some significant improvements, not only on that, but also in consultation with the stakeholders. You cannot acquire a land without a proper open consultation. So the transparency provision which I said earlier, it has been largely captured in this act, but I am told that there is some rethinking. I am not worried about any rethinking, but as far as the consultation with the stakeholders is kept, that suffices for my purpose today. Now the last point I want to make, that we need to involve and empower Panchayat Raj institutions in all land related issues. I used to be handling this Panchayat Raj amendment years ago. The left front government at that time insisted that the land should go to the panchayats. So we had put the land and land related issues as the first point in the subjects that can be allotted to the panchayats. But unfortunately, it remains only in paper. Still, it is the government official, my revenue inspector and village accountant, they appear to be more interested in land related issues rather than the people and their representatives, either in the Gram Panchayat or in the Gram Sabha. I will stop here, but I just thought, since I have maybe a couple of minutes time more, I just want to make two more points which I had picked up during the day with reference to communication between scientists and the public. As Mr. Banerjee said, there is something called a scientific knowledge and a journalist knowledge. As a public person, I can tell you, when I see a scientist, I have a respect for him. I am willing to believe him. But he is not able to talk to me in the language which I can understand. Now, the question is, should the scientist communicate directly, or should the scientist communicate through a communicator? The advantage with the communicator is he knows how to talk to the people. The disadvantage is, with due respects, he doesn't know the subject. And as Mr. Banerjee says, he only has a journalistic knowledge. Now, the key question is, how do you transfer your scientific knowledge to the journalist and improve his journalist knowledge to reach at least to your level? My biggest grievance is, as a civil servant working with scientific departments, I always felt that I couldn't immediately understand their language. I have to stop and ask, what is meant by this? Can you explain? Since I don't hesitate asking questions, I was able to learn a lot from Atomic Energy and Department of Space, which a common man may not have the courage to ask you. So I would very strongly recommend, please find a way out. I want both of you to be together, the scientist as well as the communicator. Please do not give up. You should be together. I will respect you, but he will talk to me. If he goes wrong, you will be able to correct. Now, this is the simple solution I will recommend as a common citizen of this country. Now, the other point is, please do not go to the people only when you need them. We commit that mistake. If I have some work with them, I go to them. If you have a problem with your nuclear plant, you go to that village. Why not you go to that village on a regular basis? I agree with you that you don't have staff at that level. Make use of this district information officer, or there is a huge central information service. Why not you make use of these guys and go to the people on a regular basis? Even if you don't have work, why not you visit them once in 3 months and talk to them? I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Very precise advice, exactly what I expected. The next speaker is Prabir Virakash Sir.
to be without a PowerPoint because I do believe that power corrupts and PowerPoints corrupt absolutely. So I think sometimes it's a distraction unless you really have things to show like my previous speaker did, in which case, of course, it's really great help. Otherwise, you're reading and I'm speaking and there may be a disjunct. So I'm going to be like Shiv, though I'm not as good a speaker as he is. So I would start by saying that when we talk about science communication, we are really talking of both science and technology communication. I think it's an important issue because when you start talking about science, it's understanding how nature works. And that is something which can be at least argued is objective, is dispassionate, is rational, though one may question all these words, but at least one can argue that. When it comes to technology, let's be very clear. Technology is always in the interests of people, and people are not homogeneous. There are people who benefit out of a certain project, people who lose out of a certain project, and there is an obvious conflict that takes place when technology comes into play. Some people lose, some people gain. We believe that in the overall, society as a whole gains, but that is no consolation to the person who loses his livelihood. So I think it's not just simply a matter of communication. I think it's also a matter of what kind of roles and interests different technologies play. I would also argue that technologies that come up, what technologies we choose, has also interests of different sections in it. That means I may choose a certain kind of technology, which may be private transport over public transport. I build roads, I don't provide rail systems, I don't provide public buses. I say, hey, I'm going to give you money, lend you money from the banks to buy cars, and you please have private transport. Now, this is a technological choice I'm making, but in the process of making this technological choice, I'm also building a certain kind of society that then maybe is not of interest to others. I can argue that a rational society should build public transport and not private transport, but that aside, I'm just laying before you that issues which come up like this are really not, as it is being presented by at least some of my friends here, a clear issue of as if there are only objective rational decisions to be made. There are some wise men or wise women now who can scientifically tell how society should go, and it is this relatively poor, uneducated people who are afraid to lose their livelihoods which is holding society from going forward. I think we need to get out of this. I would perhaps not agree wholeheartedly with what Shiv's formulation in the morning was, that there are different knowledge systems and we have to democratically look at all knowledge systems. I'm really saying what he was putting in a different context, that there are clear class interests involved, and technology, unfortunately, is in the business of production, and production means ultimately the political economy of the country, and political economy, unfortunately, whether you like it or not, is a matter of politics as well. So therefore, when people talk of ideologies, let's be very clear. Somebody who's saying that these oppositions are ideological, that itself is an ideology. So I think it's important for us to understand there is no ideology-free statement one can make except sun rises in the east. That's a scientific statement which can be made non-ideological. But when I say I want a certain kind of technology, it is implicit in it that I am proposing a certain kind of technology for the benefit of a certain section of the people. They may be people I like, majority of the people, sometimes a minority of the people. So I think these are issues which are social. And because they're social, Technology ultimately is decided by society at large, and I do not know of any way of deciding societal issues without politics. So I would submit that the first context that we talk about, that when we talk about science and technology communication, we must understand it's not just an issue of communication, it's a fundamental issue of what kind of society we want, who are losing, who are gaining, and the struggle between them is also reflected in the struggle of science and technology that we talk about. So one is, I would like to clear this part of it, that we are really talking about science and technology as if it's just science. It is not. And therefore, this context must be seen when we talk about either nuclear energy, we talk of GM rice, GM brinjal, and so on, that there are these issues which are unfortunately political. Let's take a very quick example of nuclear energy, for instance. It's not a question of whether nuclear energy is harmful or not. That's not the only question. The question is, we have to evaluate this, what is the cost of making nuclear energy safe? And if the cost of making nuclear energy safe rises every time an accident takes place, we finally may come to the conclusion, I'm leaving it open at the moment, though my beliefs are different, that maybe it's much too expensive for society to produce energy that way right now. Well, 50 years later, we will see. But right now, solar energy may be a cheaper alternative, even though it's much more expensive than coal, to produce than producing nuclear energy if I have to import it from Ariva and so on. This is something that the nuclear energy establishment has to come clean. What is the cost of Ariva energy? We don't know. The chairman of Ariva says it has been kept secret at the instance of the government of India. Nuclear Power Corporation is asked to keep it secret. Therefore, we are not able to tell you what the agreement is. I believe the agreement is still not settled, but I will not go there. So if you do want to keep certain things secret, then do not then comment about people who may not accept your statements, because ultimately it's you who are creating the distrust that what you are saying. I'm not going to go into GM area again in this way, because I think it is a very important area. I think transgenics, genetically modified organisms, whether they do marker-assisted breeding, all these issues need to be talked about. But I'm very clear that ultimately the issue which we have to address, which is why the resistance is coming up and we are not really addressing it properly, is that the consumers in India and elsewhere who are middle class believe that if GM technology is used, it will benefit the farmer. But I am being asked to eat something which I don't know whether it is safe or not. Why should I take the hit for the farmer's benefit is, to me, the underlying issue that comes up in GM. And unless we address that, we are not going to perhaps get my major traction. Perhaps the reason also why it has taken this form is the first bunch of stuff which came, which was really the BT stuff. And that's why cotton has much less resistance, because you wear it, we don't eat it. So the BT resistance stuff perhaps is not the best technology to use. Maybe certain other things which have directly benefited the consumer may have had less resistance. As you can see, various biotechnological products we are quite happy to ingest as medicine, but we are unhappy if it is in our food. So I think there is a certain issue that is involved here which goes beyond science and technology. It really goes that what the relationship with GM is to the people. Which people? The people who are producing it and the people who are consuming it. And I think we need to get this part of it clear. I will, in this context, I really have two topics the way Pallav has formulated my topic. One is NewsClick, which I run internet this thing, and the other is private and public science. So I'm speaking of the first before I go to my second topic, which will be very small. So the second part of it that comes up, and I think this is an important point when you talk about communication. Communication is not how effective you are, that's the only issue. In fact, a very recent study, which I think all of you, we have encountered this in different ways. a recent study said, well, there are people who oppose vaccination for their children in the US. They're anti-vaccination people. They might be crazy, but they are there. And they think that it helps, it creates autism and so on and so forth. So they sent a bunch of 4 approaches to them based on very scientific material to test what their beliefs were after they received it. And all the approaches taken of explaining well, brilliantly, different ways, talking about harms, talking about benefits, talking about how this autism thing was completely bogus, all of it failed. So what does it indicate? That if your belief system somewhere is anchored in such things like climate change means my American lifestyle will have to be given up. If I accept climate change, then I will have to cut down my energy consumption. If I cut down my energy consumption, my lifestyle is going to change. So instead of changing my lifestyle, I said I don't believe climate change. And this is exactly what the American public seems to be doing. So I think the issue of larger societal change, how we approach it, is not just a science and communication issue. It's connected very closely with what is really driving them. And unless we are able to hit those registers, unless we are able to hit those elements of it, I don't think we are going to make a success of converting people. But yet, as Gohar's study shows, there's a huge number of people there who says they don't know. Let's forget for the time people who have non-science, nonsense as their outlook. Forget them. There's a huge number of people who are in the middle ground. I think that's where our science communication has to be really oriented to or targeted towards. I will also suggest that, scientists can be good communicators, scientists may be poor communicators. I may be very good in the laboratory, very poor in my speaking. So, not very many people are chefs. So therefore, if we have that, then we have to consider that there is a responsibility of the media as an institution to bring science to the people the way you bring politics to the people. I do not think it's a question of digging in the backyards of Jairam and so on. It's really also communicating the excitement of science. It's communicating what our people are doing in different places, in the laboratories, in other places. What are the advances being made? I think this excitement of science needs to be communicated. And unfortunately, here we come to the part that is painful for me to speak about. The institution of the media today, just as the institution of science, is in the thrall of private capital. It therefore sees how it maximizes its money. And as one of the Mr. Jains, who owns Times of India, and he is open about it, others would also say it in private, is that what is a newspaper? Newspaper is essentially a means of advertisement which incidentally uses news. Somebody in the morning was talking about saccharine-coated bitter, sugar-coated bitter stuff. Well, he's saying that's what it is. We quote news so that we can sell advertisements. So if that is the business model, then what is going to happen? Science doesn't buy anything, okay? It really doesn't sell the newspaper. The more eyeballs I get, the more advertisements I get. So the page 3 is now page 1. We used to talk about page 3 news. Well, that's really right on page 1 today in Times of India, Preeti Zinta versus Ness Wadia. Now that is what sells. And if that's what sells, science, unfortunately, till you've got the Preeti Zintas, you're not going to be able to sell. So I think this whole model of the media in which private profit, advertisement is driving the media means essentially that science communication does not have takers within the media as an institution, with honorable exception of Pallab Bagla's aside. Because how many science editors are there? We don't even know who the editors of major papers today are. Forget science editors. But science editor is a virtually an extinct tribe within the media as a fraternity, except the 2 or 3 sitting here. Okay, now this is my problem, that media does not find any interest in promoting science. In fact, it would prefer to promote the Babas, which they do, by the way, and what would be actually promoting things which are illegal under I think the Magic Remedies Act and so on. That's being promoted widely in television. So if you really look at what is happening, the media does not today have any stake in science communication. It does not believe that it's its task to bring news and knowledge to the people. On the contrary, it believes that it is there to sell goods and get eyeballs, and whatever get eyeballs is what it should sell. In this context, serious news, serious anything is at a disadvantage. And that is why I turned in desperation to what I did, which is try and create for the last 5 years an organization, entity on the internet called newsclick.in, which was try and bring areas Indian media does not cover. Take, for instance, news gathering. Do you know of how many reporters are there of Indian papers and Indian media abroad? I think probably all news agencies put together is not more than 10 or 20. Now, even when Indian media was far weaker than then, much less rich, it used to have journalists in all the important areas of the world. It had in Asia, it had in Africa, it had in Middle East, it had always reporters. Now I think all the papers put together have one reporter in Middle East. And he also sits in Dubai. I would really call it Middle East. It's a little extension of Kerala perhaps. But back in Delhi, that too. So given this thing, what do we get? We get international news from the Western gaze because we get it from the AFP, PTR, Reuters, and so on. So I decided to form, the internet gave us an opportunity to do so, that I could actually bring at a very low cost, I could try and communicate a different set of things. I chose two things: West Asia, which is vital importance to India, and which we get only from the Western lens today, and science and technology, which I think are something which is not covered seriously in the media, that I will try and cover these areas. But it is a fact that internet has seen a much bigger monopoly than we have seen earlier in the media, and this is not the solution. We need to get into a situation where how through regulation, through laws, through public media, public broadcasters, how we do it. There are various options that can be discussed, but we need those options if we are going to get interest in our future, interest in an Indian view of the world, interest in science and technology to be revived again. It's a fact that scientific inflows to our schools and colleges are not taking place. The BScs and MScs who will go and teach schools are not there anymore. So we are facing a pipeline which is drying out. And we are going to face a crisis of science of a major proportion because we cannot even teach school science, forget higher science. So I think this is the tragedy that is there in front of us. If science and technology is to provide play its emancipatory role, which I think it needs to do, it's imperative of a country of India's poverty, India's stage of development, to have science and technology come in various ways, not for private profit, but for larger social good. I think for all that, we need to look at our scientific institutions, and certainly the media today is not playing the role it should. How do we either compensate that, regulate that, provide public media is something that we need to address. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It was indeed a learning experience, all the 5 talks. I learned far more than what I could give. Certainly, one point which Prabir raised just now, I have a regulatory background, So, as far as I know, the cost of power, nuclear power, anything, it is an administered price in the country. Mr. Ramesh is already here. Correct me if I am wrong, it is an administered price. Otherwise, why not from every source electricity is given at the same cost all over the country? It's not happening. It varies from about, in the case of Tadapur power station, 93 paise per unit, because with the older station we have taken the benefit, etc. And if you are going by naphtha-oriented thing, it's about 7.5 rupees per unit. I mean, socially thinking, why not 1 kilowatt hour, same money, it's not done. And secondly, again, correct me, Dr. Banerjee is already here. Insofar as atomic energy is concerned, there is a provision under the Atomic Energy Act, which is a Parliament enforced act, how to cost, etc. And various permutations are done in consultation with CAA. There is an expert body which is doing this. Everything is transparent. And there is a Gazette notification giving what are the areas in which money is to be spent, etc. And part of the money is for R&D. Part of the money is for decommissioning. Waste management is not the issue here because we are getting plutonium. Cost is already there. So it is not, I don't think there is any secret in this. I am surprised everybody talks about secret. It is under the Act of Parliament. And if you want to change, go to Parliament and change the Act. You bring in NGOs, let them decide the cost. Absolutely no problem. So it is under an Act of Parliament. Anyway, thank you very much. I think we have just on time we have finished. I am sure Dr. Ramamurthy will not dismiss me now. I am saved. Exactly 5 o'clock.